It's the kind of secret that can shatter a life. A truth so devastating, it was ripped to shreds and buried in a woman's heart. 6 years later, it would resurface in a single envelope, a ticking time bomb that would leave a man in a cold sweat of panic. The divorce court hummed with the monotonous drone of an air conditioner, a sound that seemed to mock the emotional storm brewing inside a young woman named Lily. Her hand trembled as the pen, heavy as an anchor, finally came to rest on the polished mahogany desk, her signature a final, irreversible strike against a lifetime of promises. Across from her, Chris's jaw was locked, a silent, rhythmic spasm, the only sign of the earthquake of emotion beneath his stoic facade. He couldn't bring himself to look at her, not because of indifference, but perhaps because of a guilt that burned too hot to face. For Lily, the reason didn't matter. The outcome was the same. An abyss had opened between them. Their love, born under the starry summer skies of a small-town carnival in Indiana, had become this: a cold office, an impersonal lawyer, and the rustle of papers being filed away. Their marriage, a fairy tale sealed with stolen kisses behind the prize booth, was now just a legal formality, a sad statistic. For Lily, it had been the embodiment of a dream, a belief that pure love was all the foundation a life needed. But for Chris, the dream had soured into a gilded cage. His friends, with their bachelor lives, last-minute trips, and carefree nights, had planted a poisonous seed of doubt. "You haven't lived," they'd whispered, and the words echoed in his head like a siren song. He began to yearn for a world he'd never known, a self-discovery he believed was impossible with a wedding ring on his finger. Chris became a ghost in his own home. He was physically present, but his mind wandered to distant possibilities, to a future that didn't include her. The nights grew longer, the silences heavier. Lily fought back with a ferocity born of desperation. She planned surprise trips to the lake house, hoping to reignite the flame. She suggested therapy, an idea he dismissed with a wave of his hand. She wrote him letters, trying to reclaim the magic of their early days, but the words that once enchanted him now seemed to have no effect. Every attempt was like trying to hold water in her hands. Their love slipped through her fingers, and nothing, absolutely nothing, could bring him back. And then, the inevitable arrived. Not as a sudden tempest, but as a fine, persistent rain that soaked her soul to the bone. The divorce. In that office, the buzzing of the AC was the only soundtrack to the end. But inside her leather bag, a silent secret screamed. Just minutes before entering, in the cold, impersonal bathroom, she had torn a positive pregnancy test into dozens of tiny pieces. 2 clear blue lines, unmistakable, a sentence of life that she had turned into confetti of despair. A futile act, almost insane, as if destroying the evidence could erase the truth. A new life was growing inside her, a tiny seed of a love that was now turning to dust. It was a truth that could have changed everything, or perhaps, in the most painful way, changed nothing at all. When the lawyer cleared his throat, his neutral voice broke the spell of her grief. "Is there anything else, ma'am?" The formal address felt like a slap. She was no longer Mrs. Hayes. She was just Lily Peterson, a woman alone. "No," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she stood up. The click of her heels on the marble floor echoed through the room, each step a hammer blow sealing the coffin of her marriage. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she had, she would have collapsed right there. As she crossed the threshold, the hot, humid air of the city hit her, a suffocating gasp of reality. The tears, held back for hours, finally found a path, mixing with the sweat on her face. Her hand flew to her belly, a primal gesture of protection, of acknowledgement, but she snatched it away, as if touching fire. "Not now," she told herself. "Don't think about it now." A voice ripped through the city sounds. "Lily!" It was his voice, hoarse, desperate, a sound she hadn't heard in years. Her heart gave a painful lurch. For a single fleeting second, she hesitated. Part of her wanted to turn, to run back to him, to scream about the secret in her bag, to beg for one more chance. But the other part, the part that now commanded her body, knew it was too late. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely, and then breathed in the heavy air of pollution and regret. And she kept walking. Every step was a denial, a choice. The last thing she heard was the sound of his footsteps stopping abruptly behind her, a silence that confirmed what they both already knew. It was the end. 6 years. In the grand scheme of the universe, 6 years is less than a blink of an eye, a cosmic speck of dust. But in the life of a man, 6 years can be an eternity, a desert of time filled only with the sand of routine. For Chris Hayes, that was the exact measure of his self-imposed exile. The freedom he had craved, the journey of self-discovery he used to justify the demolition of his marriage, had revealed itself as a monotonous, gray landscape. His life was an unchanging ritual: the gym, a long hot shower, a bitter black coffee. His luxury apartment, with its designer furniture and a panoramic view of the city, was a silent mausoleum. A silence so profound that sometimes he could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of an imaginary clock, the echo of a laugh that no longer existed. Lily's laugh. He buried himself in his work, a renowned architect whose name was synonymous with success. But the bold projects and client praises were only temporary distractions. At the end of the day, returning to his empty, immaculate apartment, the same dull ache waited in his chest, a faithful and unwanted companion. On that particular Thursday morning, something in the air felt different. A heavier stillness, a more palpable melancholy. He walked into the kitchen, the black granite countertop reflecting his tired face. His eyes were drawn to the digital calendar on the wall. The date glowed in a subtle red. September 14th. A knot formed in his throat. It would have been their 10th wedding anniversary. He let out a short, humorless laugh, a dry sound that died in the silence of the kitchen. Would have been. 2 words that carried the weight of a decade of lost possibilities, of futures that never were. A firm knock on the door broke the monotony. It wasn't the doorman or the housekeeper. He wasn't expecting anyone. A cold sense of unease ran through him as he walked to the entrance. When he opened the door, a delivery man in a sweaty brown uniform stood there. The man held out a tablet for him to sign and a large padded envelope. There was no return address, just his name and address, printed on a simple label. A chilling, sharp premonition ran down his spine. Something in that package had the power to alter the orbit of his stagnant world. He closed the door, the envelope in his hands weighing a ton. For a moment, he considered throwing it away, ignoring it, and continuing his safe, predictable routine. But curiosity, mixed with an inexplicable fear, was stronger. With slightly trembling fingers, he tore open the edge of the package. What he found inside made the air rush from his lungs. First, a photograph. On it was a boy, perhaps 5 years old, with messy, light brown hair, as if he had just woken up from a nap, and eyes. Oh, those eyes! They were a green so intense, so familiar, that Chris's heart skipped a beat. They were Lily's eyes. But the smile was a deeper blow still. A wide, mischievous grin that formed small dimples on his cheeks. The same smile Lily gave him on those lazy Sunday mornings when the world seemed to belong only to the two of them. His entire body went cold. Behind the photo was a letter folded in three. The paper was simple, but the handwriting. He would recognize that handwriting anywhere in the world. It was Lily's. His hands trembled so much he could barely unfold the paper. The words seemed to dance before his eyes, but he forced his brain to focus, to read, to understand the message that had traveled for 6 years to find him. Chris, I know you might hate me. You might not even think about me anymore. That would be fair. But there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you a long, long time ago. The boy in the photo is Lucas. He's your son. I wanted to tell you. God knows I wanted to, but I didn't have the courage. We were so broken, and I convinced myself you'd be better off without me. Without us. I thought I was sparing you a burden. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was wrong. But this isn't about me or you anymore. It's about him. Lucas deserves to know who his father is, and I can't carry this secret alone anymore. If you want to meet him, if there is any part of you that wants to find us, we'll be at the city park this Saturday, at noon, near the lake. If you don't show up, I'll understand. I really will. But know that one day he will ask about you, and I will have to find a way to explain why his father didn't want to know him. The letter slipped from his fingers, floating slowly to the tiled floor. Chris's legs gave way. He stumbled back, his body searching for support, until his back hit the cold wall. He slid to the floor, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. His head was spinning. Disbelief. Rage. Regret. A giant wave of emotions hit him, drowning him. Son. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the strands, desperately trying to make sense of it all. A son. He had a 5-year-old son he never knew about. 6 years. 6 years stolen. 6 years of first steps, first words, birthdays, scraped knees. 6 years he could never, ever get back. The images of that day in the lawyer's office flooded his mind. Lily's devastated look, the way she flinched, the way she fled without looking back. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and meaningless, began to fit together with brutal clarity. He should have followed her. He should have demanded answers, fought for her, for them. But his wounded pride and blind rage prevented him from seeing the truth that was right there in her eyes. He leaned over, picked up the photograph from the floor. His eyes traced every detail of the boy's face. There was so much of Lily in that smile. But now he could see himself, too, in the shape of the chin, in the arch of the eyebrows, in the way the head tilted slightly to the side. An overwhelming mixture of astonishment and sadness filled him. The clock on the wall read 9:30 in the morning. Saturday was in 2 days. 48 hours to decide the course of the rest of his life. His pulse quickened. Could he do this? Could he face Lily after all the silence, all the pain? But the thought of losing the chance to know his son, of letting that boy believe his father didn't want him, was unbearable. Fear and pride could not defeat him this time. Not again. Saturday dawned under a leaden sky, a thick blanket of gray clouds that promised rain that never came, just hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. It was a perfect reflection of Lily's state of mind. Sitting on a wooden bench in the park, she felt the morning chill seep into her jacket, a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her hands were tucked in her pockets, her knuckles white, as she watched Lucas a few feet away. With his 5 years of inexhaustible energy, he ran after a soccer ball, his brown hair flying, his laugh cutting through the quiet of the park. He was a point of light and color in a world that, for Lily, seemed to have faded. He was the reason for everything, the anchor that had kept her sane for the last 6 years of a silent exile. But today, his innocence seemed almost cruel, a painful contrast to the anguish that gnawed at her chest. She looked at the watch on her wrist. 11:58. 2 minutes. In 120 seconds, the hope she had hesitantly cultivated for 2 days would either turn into relief or shatter into a million pieces. What if he doesn't come? The question echoed in her mind, each syllable a blow. Could she bear it? Could she look at Lucas later and invent an excuse, another layer of lies to protect his little heart? A small hand tugged at her jacket sleeve, and a soft voice brought her back to reality. "Mom!" Lucas was standing beside her, the soccer ball forgotten in the grass. His green eyes, a direct inheritance from her, stared at her with a concern that belied his young age. "Are you okay?" Lily forced a smile, a movement of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, my love, just thinking." But before she could invent a distraction, a sound broke the tension. The sound of footsteps. Not the steps of someone strolling, but of someone running. Hurried, almost desperate, crushing the dry leaves on the path. Her heart, already beating fast, leaped into her throat. She turned her head slowly, afraid of what she would find, or worse, what she wouldn't. And then she saw him. There he was. Chris. Standing a few feet away, his chest heaving, his hair slightly disheveled from the run. His eyes, darker and deeper than she remembered, were fixed on hers. In that instant, the world around them disappeared. The sound of traffic on the nearby avenue, the barking of a dog, the buzzing of insects, everything dissolved into a deafening silence. A universe of unspoken emotions, of unasked questions, and unconfessed regrets passed between them in that single, devastating moment. 6 years of silence, pain, and distance, condensed into a single look. It was Lucas who broke the spell. "Mom, who is he?" he asked, his childish voice sounding strangely loud in the stillness that had settled. Lily swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. The tears she had fought so hard to contain began to well up, blurring her vision. She turned to her son, the center of her universe, and said the words she had rehearsed and feared for years. "That," she whispered, "that's your dad." For Chris, the ground seemed to undulate beneath his feet. The sight before him was so overwhelming that his brain refused to process it completely. Lily, she was there, real, tangible, with the same eyes that mixed storm and calm, the same mouth he knew so well. But there were new fine lines around her eyes, subtle marks of time, and an exhaustion he hadn't been there to witness, to ease. And beside her, clinging to her sleeve like a small castaway, was the boy from the photo, his son, Lucas. The boy stared at him with cautious curiosity, his green eyes identical to his mother's, but with an intensity that was purely his own. Chris's world tilted dangerously. "This is real," he thought, the phrase repeating in his mind. He is real. All the emotions he had repressed for the past 2 days, the guilt, the anger, the regret, and a fragile, terrifying hope, threatened to overflow, tearing him apart. He swallowed hard, his throat painfully dry. With a monumental effort, he took a hesitant step forward, then another, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. "Hi," he managed to say, his voice coming out hoarse, broken, a pathetic sound for such a monumental occasion. How could such a small word even begin to build a bridge over such a vast chasm? Lily's eyes shone with tears, but she nodded, an almost imperceptible gesture of encouragement. "Lucas," she whispered, kneeling beside her son to be at his level. "This is Chris, your dad." Lucas blinked, his expression unreadable as he transferred his gaze from his mother to the tall, unknown man in front of him. "Are you my dad?" he asked, his voice soft. But the question hit Chris with the force of a physical blow. He could only nod, unable to trust his own voice. "Yes," he finally managed to rasp. "I'm your dad." The boy seemed to ponder that, his head tilted to the side, a small wrinkle of concentration forming between his eyebrows. The silence stretched, charged with unbearable expectation. Then, he asked the question. The inevitable question. The simplest and most devastating of all. "Why did you never come?" Chris's heart broke. The weight of that innocent question crushed him. The weight of 6 years of absence, of a lifetime of not knowing. He looked at Lily, a silent plea for help, but she had her head bowed, guilt etched on every line of her face. It was up to him to answer. "I didn't know," Chris said, his voice trembling, the words coming out in a whisper laden with pain. "I didn't know about you, Lucas. If I had known, I swear, I would have been here from day one." The boy seemed to consider that, his childish but surprisingly perceptive eyes examining Chris's face, perhaps looking for a sign of a lie. After a pause that seemed to last a lifetime, he nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing a little. "Okay," he said. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. It was a door that hadn't been slammed in his face. Chris let out a shaky sigh, a relief so intense it made him dizzy. He knelt down, getting to Lucas's level, trying to find the right words amidst the whirlwind in his mind. I really want to get to know you, Lucas. If you'll let me." Lucas looked at his mother, seeking her approval, her security. Lily gave him a soft, encouraging smile, pushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "It's okay, my love. You can take your time." Lucas nodded again, his fidgety little fingers toying with the hem of his jacket. Then he looked at Chris, and a different light shone in his eyes. "Want to play ball with me?" The request took Chris completely by surprise. He blinked, and then a small, breathless laugh escaped his lips. "Yes, of course," he said. "I'd love to." Lucas smiled, a genuine, open smile that made Chris's heart swell in a way he never thought was possible. The boy picked up the ball and held it out to him. In that simple gesture, in the clumsy kick that followed, something new began. Something fragile, uncertain and nameless, but with the unmistakable scent of a new beginning. The afternoon unfolded with the fragile, hesitant beauty of a flower blossoming in slow motion. Chris's first clumsy kick of the ball was met with a laugh from Lucas, a sound so pure and contagious that it dissolved a layer of the ice that had encased his father's heart. They played. It wasn't a real game, with rules or teams, but an improvised dance of passes, dribbles, and runs across the damp grass. Chris, who hadn't kicked a ball in years, rediscovered a childlike joy, a lightness he thought he had lost forever. He watched his son, fascinated, the way Lucas ran with his arms slightly open for balance, the concentration on his face when he tried to control the ball, the glimmer of triumph in his eyes with every small success. Every detail was a gift, a piece of a puzzle Chris was desperate to put together. Sitting on the wooden bench, Lily was a silent spectator of the scene. Her heart was a pendulum swinging between happiness and pain. Seeing them together, the father and son who had never met, was the realization of a secret dream she had held for 6 years. But every shared laugh between them was also a knife that stirred the wound of her choice, of the stolen time, of the family that could have been. From time to time, Chris's gaze met hers over Lucas's head. The glances were charged, full of questions, of silent accusations, and of a deep longing. There was an ocean of unspoken words between them, an abyss of misunderstandings and hurt. But for now, he focused on Lucas, on the miracle of the present moment. After almost an hour, Lucas finally threw himself on the grass, out of breath, and with a smile that went from ear to ear. "You're not so bad, Dad," he said. And the word "Dad," said with such naturalness, sounded like the most sacred of songs to Chris's ears. "Thanks, champ," he replied, his throat tight. The night arrived stealthily, bringing with it the weight of the day. Lily's apartment was a reflection of her, cozy, organized, with touches of a life Chris was completely unfamiliar with. Colorful toys in a corner of the living room, children's drawings held by magnets on the refrigerator, a soft smell of home that brutally contrasted with the aseptic emptiness of his own house. He helped put Lucas to bed. The boy, exhausted by the afternoon of emotions, fell asleep almost instantly. Chris watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling with soft breaths. The perfection of that small being, his son, was overwhelming. The love he felt was so vast it hurt, a pain mixed with the corrosive guilt of the lost years. He adjusted the blanket over Lucas's shoulders, a paternal gesture that felt both strange and perfectly natural. When he left the room, he found Lily in the living room. She was standing near the window, looking at the city lights, her arms crossed over her chest like a barrier. The silence between them was no longer the silence of the park, filled with a child's laughter. It was a dense, heavy silence, laden with 6 years of untold history. It was Chris who broke it. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You should have told me, Lily." She didn't turn around. Her shoulders hunched slightly. "I know," she answered, her voice muffled. "I wanted to. So many times I picked up the phone, wrote and deleted messages. But we were so broken. I looked at you, at the abyss between us, and I could only think that you didn't want me anymore. And if you didn't want me, how could you want a child? An obligation, a chain that would bind you to me forever." The raw honesty in her words struck him. He approached, stopping a few feet from her. "You didn't give me a chance to choose. You decided for both of us." "I was scared," she said, turning suddenly, her green eyes shining with unshed tears, a mixture of fury and pain. "You have no idea what that was like, Chris. Being alone, with that positive test in my hand, feeling the world crumble. And then sitting in that lawyer's office and seeing you. You couldn't even look me in the eye. To me, that was the final sentence. You had already left long before you signed that paper." The accusation hit him hard because it was true. He was angry. He was hurt, consumed by his own selfishness and the feeling that life was passing him by. But he had never. "I never stopped loving you, Lily," he said, his voice choked, the confession escaping before he could contain it. "Not for a single day." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. "Love wasn't enough to save us back then, was it?" "Maybe not," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "But maybe it's enough to start fixing us now for him." The wounds were open, exposed under the dim light of the room. The hurts, the mistakes, the unspoken words. Everything was there, pulsing between them. But in the midst of that pain, for the first time, there was also truth. A brutal, but necessary truth. Lily looked away, the tears finally running down her face. "I never stopped being scared," she whispered. "Scared you'd leave me again. Scared I wasn't enough." He took the last step that separated them, his heart pounding. I'm scared too. Scared I lost everything forever." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a silence of contemplation, of possibilities. We can take it slow," Lily said finally, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "For Lucas." Chris looked deep into her eyes, seeing the woman he fell in love with and the strong woman she had become. "For Lucas," he agreed. And then he added, his voice firm with a new determination. "And for us, too." From that day on, a new and fragile routine began to form. Chris became a constant but careful presence. He didn't want to invade, didn't want to scare her. He would show up at school pickup, and Lucas's smile at seeing him was a balm for his soul. He helped with homework, discovering a world of letters, numbers, and colorful drawings. He learned that Lucas was obsessed with dinosaurs, especially the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and that his favorite juice was the purple one. With Lucas, the connection flourished every day, natural and strong. They built with Legos, watched cartoons, and Chris even learned to do the villain's voice in bedtime stories. But with Lily, the ground was still unstable. There was a cautious cordiality, a dance around the wreckage of the past. They talked about Lucas's day, about bills and logistics, but rarely about themselves. The walls she had built around her heart were still standing. But Chris noticed, with a growing hope, that they no longer seemed so tall. He saw small cracks forming, tiny glimpses of the Lily he loved, in a spontaneous smile, a lingering look, a gesture of concern when he seemed tired. And he clung to these moments, to these small victories, like a thirsty man clings to raindrops in the desert. He knew the journey would be long, but for the first time in 6 years, he was no longer lost. He had a map, and the destination was a place called family. Autumn in their city didn't have the vibrant colors of New England, but it carried a beauty of its own, a softness in the air, a golden light that seemed to bathe the city in nostalgia. It was on such an afternoon at the fall festival that, ironically, took place in the middle of autumn, that the fragile tapestry they were weaving gained a new, stronger, and more colorful thread. The air was filled with the sweet smell of cotton candy and the salty aroma of popcorn, mixed with the sound of music from loudspeakers and the laughter of dozens of children. Lucas, as always, was a dynamo of energy, running ahead, his face lit up by the pure joy of existing. Chris walked beside Lily, his hands in his jeans pockets, a posture that tried to seem casual but hid the caution of a man walking on eggshells. They were an almost perfect image of a family, but both knew the precariousness of the scene, the distance that still existed in the space between them. The sound of dry leaves breaking under their feet was the only dialogue. It was Lily who spoke first, her voice soft, almost a murmur. "He's so happy." Chris turned his face to her, a small smile touching his lips. "He deserves all the happiness in the world." Their eyes met for a moment, and in that brief contact, a silent truth was shared. Lucas's happiness was the common ground, the bridge over the abyss. Suddenly, Lucas's voice called them, full of urgency and excitement. "Mom! Dad! Come see this!" The word "Dad" still caused a small electric shock in Chris's chest, a wave of warmth and gratitude that he doubted would ever pass. They followed the voice and found Lucas standing in front of an improvised stall where several children were leaning over small tables, concentrating with paintbrushes, pots of colored paint, and dozens of pumpkins of all sizes. Lucas picked up a paintbrush with solemn determination and looked at them, his green eyes shining with an idea. "Let's paint a pumpkin family? Like us?" The question, so simple and so profound, hung in the air. Chris looked at Lily, his heart in his throat. He saw in her eyes a reflection of his own emotion, a vulnerability she rarely let show. A slow, genuine smile blossomed on her lips, breaking the mask of caution. "Of course, my love," she said, her voice slightly choked. They sat on the small wooden benches, one on each side of Lucas. Chris chose a tall, slender pumpkin. Lily picked one with a rounder, more graceful shape. And Lucas, with all the care in the world, selected a small and perfectly round one. "Mine's the smallest, because I'm the smallest," he explained with irrefutable logic. They painted in a comfortable silence, broken only by Lucas's instructions and their laughter. The outside world, with its complexities and pains, seemed to recede, leaving only that small circle of light and color. Chris's fingers, accustomed to the precision of architectural blueprints, proved surprisingly clumsy with the child's paintbrush. He tried to paint a smile on his pumpkin, but the result was a crooked, comical line that made Lucas war with laughter. "Dad, it's all crooked." In the middle of the laughter, Lily reached out and, with her thumb, wiped a spot of black paint from Chris's cheek. It was a quick, almost accidental touch, but her fingers lingered there for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Her skin was soft, the gesture laden with an ancient intimacy. Time stopped. Chris's heart stumbled. He looked at her, and, in her eyes, saw not only the mother of his son, but the woman he had never stopped loving. The girl from the fair, the bride at the altar, the wife he abandoned. She looked away quickly, her face flushed, but something had changed. An invisible wall had turned to dust. When they were finished, the three pumpkins were side by side. A big one, a medium one, and a small one, all with the same crooked, happy smile. "It's us," Lucas declared, clapping his hands, his face radiant with pride. "Our family." Chris swallowed hard, his chest tight with an emotion so strong it almost suffocated him. "Yes, son," he whispered. "It's us." Later that night, the quiet of the apartment was different. Lucas slept the sleep of the just, dreaming, perhaps, of smiling pumpkins. Chris didn't leave as usual. He lingered in the living room, knowing that this night was a turning point. Lily was on the small balcony, looking at the starless sky, covered by the city's light pollution. He approached in silence, stopping beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. The night wind carried the smell of rain and wet earth. "Do you still think about that day?" he asked, his voice low, breaking the silence. "The day at the office?" She didn't need to ask which day he was referring to. There was only one. She hugged her own body, a gesture of self-protection. "Every day," she confessed. "Every detail. The sound of the pen on the paper, the hum of the air conditioner, the way you wouldn't look at me." Her confession was a knife in his chest. "I was a coward," he said, his voice hoarse with regret. "I should have gone after you. Should have broken down your door if I had to. I should have fought." She turned her face to him, her eyes shining under the faint light from the street. A solitary tear ran down her cheek. "And I shouldn't have run away. I should have screamed, should have forced you to listen to me." He was moved. So was she. The air between them vibrated with the pain of the past and the fragile possibility of the future. "Lily," he began, his voice trembling. "Can we try again? For real? Not just for Lucas? For us?" The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of 6 years of separation. She looked at him, her eyes searching his in the darkness, looking for any sign of doubt, any hesitation. What if we mess up again, Chris? What if we hurt each other again? I don't know if I can go through all that again." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His hands found her face, holding it with a delicacy he didn't know he possessed. His thumbs traced the path of her tears. "We might mess up. We probably will. We're human. We're imperfect. But I'd much rather mess up by your side than get it right alone. I don't want to spend another day wondering, what if?" A sob escaped her lips, and she leaned into his touch, her forehead resting against his. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her with a strength that said everything words couldn't. It was a hug that asked for forgiveness, that promised protection, that celebrated a reunion. "I missed you so much," she whispered against his chest, her voice broken. "Me too," he replied, his vision blurred by his own tears. "I felt alone for 6 years, even when I was surrounded by people." And there, on the balcony of an apartment, under a starless sky, they were no longer alone. For the first time in a very long time, they were together. The embrace on the balcony wasn't a period, but a comma, a necessary pause before an entirely new sentence. From that night on, the air between Chris and Lily changed. Caution gave way to a rediscovered intimacy, hesitant like a child's first steps, but undeniably real. Chris's nights on the living room sofa were replaced by whispered conversations in the kitchen, long after Lucas had fallen asleep, where they no longer spoke of the past with pain, but with the curiosity of archaeologists discovering an ancient city, trying to understand how the ruins were formed so they could build something new and stronger over them. He learned about Lily's fears as a single mother, the sleepless nights with fevers, the overwhelming loneliness of Sunday afternoons. She learned about his emptiness, the professional success that never filled the hole in his soul, the belated realization that the freedom he sought was, in fact, the loneliest of prisons. They were, with infinite delicacy, falling in love again, not with the memory of each other, but with the people 6 years of pain, growth, and solitude had transformed them into. One rainy afternoon, the kind that washes the dust from the city and leaves the smell of wet earth in the air, Lucas came running from the small table where he was drawing, his face flushed with excitement. He waved a sheet of paper with a fervor only a 5-year-old possesses. Look what I made." Chris took the drawing. His heart, which he thought had already gotten used to strong emotions, lurched. On the paper, under a crooked 7-colored rainbow, were 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 1 medium, and 1 small, all holding hands. What made Chris's throat close, however, were the words written in shaky, mirrored letters above the figures. "My family." Lily knelt beside Lucas, her eyes shining. "My love, it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Lucas, puffing out his chest with pride, pointed to the refrigerator. "Can you put it there with the others?" "Can I?" Chris asked, looking at Lily, a request for permission for something that went far beyond just tacking a drawing on the fridge. She smiled, a smile that reached her eyes and illuminated her entire face. "Of course you can. That's where it belongs." Together, the 3 of them walked to the kitchen. Chris lifted Lucas so he could pin his manifesto with a sun magnet. And there, among utility bills and reminders, the simple, powerful drawing declared a new truth. My family. It was no longer a maybe, a what if. It was real. The first cold snap of December arrived by surprise, a polar front that made everyone pull their coats from the back of the closet. From the apartment window, they saw the white sky and felt the wind whistle. Lucas, who only knew the cold from the air conditioner, was ecstatic. "Is it snowing?" he asked, his nose pressed against the glass. Chris laughed. "No, champ. It's just a little cold." But Lucas's question sparked a flame in Lily's eyes. She disappeared for a moment and came back with bags of cotton balls, rolls of tape, and scissors. "If we don't have real snow," she announced with a mischievous glint, "we'll make our own." And so in the middle of the living room, they embarked on the most improbable mission: building a cotton snowman. They rolled cotton balls that fell apart, taped them together, and laughed at the crooked structure that kept leaning to one side. Chris lifted Lucas onto his shoulders so he could put the head in place. Lily found an old scarf and a party hat to adorn their creation. The result was a clumsy, bizarre, and absolutely perfect figure. "We did it!" Lucas shouted, dancing around the snowman. Chris watched the scene, his heart overflowing. He looked at Lily, who had a wisp of cotton stuck in her hair, her cheeks flushed with effort and laughter. In that moment, in the soft afternoon light, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He approached, took the cotton from her hair, and the words came out before he could think. An impulse coming straight from his soul. "I love you." It wasn't a whisper. It was a declaration. Lily's eyes widened for a second, and then filled with an emotion so deep he felt as if he could drown in them. "I love you too, Chris," she answered, her voice firm, without hesitation. I never stopped. It was then that Lucas, stopping his dance, looked from one to the other, his head tilted. "So, are we a real family now?" The question hung in the air, simple, direct, demanding a definitive answer. Chris knelt down, face to face with his son. He pulled the boy into a tight hug, burying his face in his sweet-smelling hair. "Yes, son," he said, his voice choked. "We are a family. For real." Lily joined the hug, wrapping her arms around the two men in her life, her face pressed against Chris's back. She laughed and cried at the same time. And there, on the living room floor, hugging next to a cotton snowman, they were no longer three broken people trying to fix themselves. They were one. They were home. A home built not on perfection, but on the ruins of the past, cemented by forgiveness, by the courage to try again, and by the unconditional love that, after all, was the only thing that really mattered. What did you think of the story? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to help us out, and leave a comment below with what you think of Chris and Lily's journey.